Your eyes shouldn't work this way. That's the first thought that hits you when you wake up after the ritual, staring at your reflection in the polished surface of your chamber wall. You've always had two eyes, basic human anatomy, but now there's a third one and it's staring back at you with a golden iris that seems to move independently of your will. The worst part isn't the physical impossibility of it. The worst part is that you can see things through it that shouldn't be visible. Colors that don't exist in normal space. Geometries that make your other eyes hurt when they try to track the patterns. You're a navigator of the Imperium of Man now, and you've just been locked into a nightmare that will last until your mind shatters or your body fails, whichever comes first. Welcome to the life that most Imperial citizens don't even know exists. The transformation doesn't make sense to most people who haven't experienced it, which is basically everyone outside of the Navigator houses. They imagine it's some kind of upgrade, like acquiring a new tool or developing a useful skill. They couldn't be more wrong. Being a navigator is like having the universe pour itself directly into your skull while your bones slowly replace themselves with something harder and colder. It's like the warp, that roiling dimension of chaos and impossible things that exists alongside normal space, decided to reach through your skull and rewire how you perceive reality. And the warp doesn't do this nicely. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't come with an instruction manual. It just happens, and you're left scrambling to understand what you've become while your own body becomes increasingly foreign to you. The fact that this process is seen as an honor by the Imperium is perhaps the cruelest joke of all. The process that creates a navigator begins long before the third eye opens. Every member of a navigator house knows their entire life trajectory before they're old enough to walk. The great houses, Belisarius, Corvain, Kraul, and a dozen others whose names carry weight in the Adeptus Terra, maintain bloodlines stretching back to the dark age of technology itself, to when humanity still remembered how to talk to the stars. These families have bred for navigator potential so intensively that it's written into their genetics, encoded in their DNA like a time bomb waiting for puberty to activate it. The children of these houses are marked from conception. Some members of the family might hope their child will be ordinary, that the mutation will skip a generation, but deep down they know better. The navigator gene is too strong, too deeply embedded in the bloodline to be denied. It is inevitable as death itself. The conditioning starts early, almost impossibly early. A 3-year-old navigator child begins their training. Meditation exercises, mental disciplines designed to prepare the mind for what's coming. By the time they're 10, they're studying theoretical mathematics that describes impossible geometries and impossible spaces. They read texts written in languages that shouldn't exist, languages that seem designed specifically to express concepts that human minds were never meant to think about. Some of these texts are so dangerous that reading them can cause permanent psychological damage. The tutors who oversee this education watch the children carefully, waiting to see which ones will crack under the weight of forbidden knowledge, and which ones will develop the kind of mental resilience that actually makes them suitable for navigator work. It's a brutal process of selection by attrition, where weakness is simply weeded out. Most people would look at this as abuse, and they wouldn't be entirely wrong. The Imperium doesn't see it that way, though. To the officials in the Adeptus Terra who understand what navigators actually are, what they actually do, the conditioning is mercy. Better to break a child's mind gradually and rebuild it stronger than to have that mind shattered completely when the third eye opens. The children who make it through the first decade of training go into puberty already partially prepared for horror. But no amount of preparation can actually ready someone for the opening. You can warn someone the sky is about to fall on their head, but that doesn't make it less traumatic when it actually happens. You can teach someone to expect pain, but the reality of experiencing that pain is always worse than anything imagination can conjure. The opening of the third eye is the transformation from child to navigator, and it's almost never survivable in the conventional sense of the word. The lucky ones, and there are very few of them, experience it gradually, a slow awakening of perception stretching across weeks or months. They get warnings, strange dreams that feel more real than normal life, a metallic taste that won't go away no matter how much water they drink, tingling around their eye sockets like something is pressing against them from behind. These gradual cases can be managed. The child can be medicated, guided through the worst of it by experienced tutors and priests. They can maintain something resembling their original personality throughout the process. They might even emerge with enough of their original self intact to remember the person they were before becoming what they are now. For everyone else, it's catastrophic. The opening happens all at once, a violent rupture of consciousness that hits like a bomb going off inside your skull. One moment you're in the training chamber, surrounded by familiar walls and familiar faces. The next moment reality folds in on itself. The walls become transparent. The people around you suddenly have additional dimensions they didn't have before. And you see it for the first time, the warp. The sheer scope of it, the infinite complexity. The writhing chaos of a dimension where thought becomes physical force and emotion manifests as tangible reality. Most of the children don't survive the experience intact. Some die outright. Their hearts simply stop, as if their bodies have decided that continuing to exist in a universe where such things are real is simply not worth the effort. Their last moments are filled with sensations that no human should ever experience, perceptions that shatter consciousness itself. Others survive physically but emerge shattered, their minds fragmented into pieces that can never quite be reassembled. They spend the rest of their lives in quiet chambers, capable only of the simplest functions, their eyes staring at absolutely nothing. The lights remain on in these chambers at all times. The walls are bare except for protective runes. Attendants come to feed them, to clean them, to ensure their bodies continue functioning even as their minds remain lost somewhere beyond the reach of normal consciousness. A few navigators have left fragmented accounts of what this is like from the inside, experiencing 17 different versions of their own death happening simultaneously. Their consciousness being pulled in directions that don't exist in normal geometry, sensations of existing and not existing at the same time. Those accounts were sealed away immediately. The surviving navigators were heavily sedated and confined. Their families were reminded that some things should never be written down, never be documented, because the knowledge itself might attract attention from the very thing they're describing. But a very few, a truly rare few, survive the opening of the third eye with their minds intact and their consciousness still recognizable as human. These survivors pay a price so fundamental that it redefines what it means to be human at all. The first price is written in flesh and blood. The mutations begin subtly but accelerate quickly. The skin around the eyes begins to darken, the pigmentation spreading like ink through water. Your normal eyes change. The iris is becoming ringed with patterns that shift when you look at them directly. The bone of your forehead begins to ache, a deep pain that radiates outward from the center of your brow. A pain that won't respond to any medication or treatment, because it isn't actually coming from your bones at all. It's coming from somewhere deeper, from the parts of your consciousness that exist in the warp, and then the skin splits open and the third eye emerges. The emergence is wet and peeling, like something organic being torn open from the inside, and the sensation never quite goes away. Every time the third eye opens, even if it's been years, you feel that tearing sensation. It's not painful exactly, but it's wrong in a way that makes your mind recoil from it. The new eye itself is a horror of its own. The sclera is jet black, a darkness so complete that it seems to absorb light rather than reflect it. The iris is golden, with patterns that seem to move with a life of their own, spiraling geometries that hurt to watch for too long. The pupil dilates and contracts independently of your other eyes. When it looks into the warp, it sees things that no human eye was ever meant to perceive, and it's looking into the warp constantly, whether you want it to or not. The third eye is only the beginning. Your skin becomes pale, sometimes almost luminescent in certain light, like the warp has bleached the color out from the inside. Some navigators develop strange markings across their bodies, symbols and sigils that appear without explanation and can't be removed no matter how hard you try. Medical specialists have examined these markings extensively. Some appear to be written in languages that predate the current age of the Imperium. Others seem to be purely random, meaningless to human understanding. A few develop additional appendages, extra fingers growing from unexpected places on their bodies, skin flaps that extend from the arms or back, organs designed for purposes that even the navigator themselves doesn't understand. Your hair, if it remains at all, becomes white or silver regardless of your original coloring. For some navigators, the hair doesn't stay still. It floats slightly even in normal gravity, as if suspended in water that only exists around the navigator's head. The sensory changes go far beyond the physical mutations. Your sense of smell becomes insanely acute but warped into something completely alien. You can smell the warp, a scent like sulfur and ancient things and wrongness. You can smell the future. Or at least you experience something that your brain translates as smell when you perceive probability branches and timelines splitting before you. It's like trying to smell colors or taste geometries. Your ability to taste changes too. Some navigators develop the capacity to taste emotions, genuine, physical flavors on their tongue corresponding to fear or hope or despair radiating from those around them. A crew member walks past your chamber wall, and if you could taste them through the metal, you'd know exactly how terrified they are of you, how deeply their superstitious mind abhors what you've become. Your hearing warps into something else entirely. You can hear frequencies that shouldn't exist. You can perceive vibrations in dimensions that shouldn't carry sound at all. Some navigators report that they can hear thoughts. Not telepathy exactly, but something stranger. A kind of resonance between their own consciousness and the warp, touched minds of others around them. The neurological restructuring is the most profound and least visible change. Your brain doesn't just gain new abilities, it physically rewires itself, forming neural pathways that connect to parts of your brain that in normal humans lie dormant and useless. Your pineal gland, supposedly the seat of psychic potential according to ancient texts, grows to enormous size, reshaping the interior of your skull. New sections of your brain form where old ones used to be. Your spatial reasoning becomes perfect, capable of holding multiple three-dimensional and higher dimensional geometries in your mind at once without your consciousness fragmenting. Your precognition develops, the ability to sense probability branches, to see the potential futures spreading out before you like an infinite tree. And all of this happens while your consciousness begins to split in two. This split consciousness is the single most disturbing consequence of being a navigator, and it's something that no amount of preparation can actually make you ready for. Imagine being in two rooms at once, fully aware and fully present in both rooms simultaneously, and then imagine that one of these rooms exists in a completely different dimension and follows completely different physical laws. Imagine maintaining this awareness constantly, every moment of every day without being able to stop or rest or step away. Now imagine doing this for decades. This is what it means to be a navigator. A portion of your consciousness is permanently stretched across the barrier between real space and the warp, maintaining the connection that allows starships to navigate through the void. You are in effect a living bridge between two realities that were never meant to touch. Most people would go insane immediately from the sheer disorientation alone. The mental toll of this constant bifurcation is catastrophic and almost impossible to overstate. Most navigators develop what the Imperium calls warp taint psychosis. By the time they reach their 30s, your thoughts start blending together with echoes from the warp. You lose track of which ideas are actually yours and which are psychic resonance from that nightmare dimension. You have moments where you can't remember which reality you're actually in right now. Some navigators develop the belief that their physical body is just a puppet being controlled from somewhere distant, that their true self actually lives permanently in the warp. Others become convinced they're not a single person at all, but multiple people sharing one body, different consciousnesses layered on top of each other like sheets of transparent glass, each one experiencing slightly different versions of reality. Some report that they can hear themselves arguing with themselves, their different aspects of consciousness debating which action to take next. The physical architecture of a navigator's life in the Imperium is designed to be a prison disguised as protection. When a navigator is assigned to a ship, they occupy something called a navigator's chamber, a specialized compartment sealed off from the rest of the vessel by multiple layers of lead and plasteel. There are no windows. There is no view of space or stars or anything beyond the walls. The walls themselves are covered in equations and protective sigils, runes designed to ward against unwanted attention from the warp. Some of these runes are actually functional, providing a genuine layer of protection. Others are purely psychological comfort for someone desperately in need of the illusion of control. The symbols glow faintly under specialized light, meant to be reassuring but somehow achieving the opposite effect. Every time the navigator looks at them, they're reminded of how little control they actually have. The chamber itself is usually quite small, barely larger than a luxury cabin on most vessels. There's a bed designed specifically for navigator physiology. complete with restraints built into the frame in case the navigator has a psychotic episode or a warp vision so severe that their body thrashes uncontrollably. These restraints aren't used as punishment but as safety measure to prevent a thrashing navigator from seriously injuring themselves against the walls or the metal furniture. There's a toilet and washing station, usually cramped and uncomfortable, a desk or table where the navigator can rest their hands during work, and if the navigator is lucky, maybe a small library of books deemed safe for navigator consumption. Historical texts, technical manuals, maybe some fiction. Some navigators are permitted to keep personal items from their family's holdings, mementos of a life before the third eye opened, before everything changed. These items provide the only connection to who they used to be, before isolation became their permanent state. The isolation is absolute in every meaningful sense of the word. A navigator is not permitted to fraternize with the crew. The official excuse is practical. The presence of a warp-touched individual causes psychological disturbance in those unprepared for the experience, and the visible mutation can trigger superstitious fear. But the real reason is more fundamental than that. A navigator is a walking reminder of the precariousness of human existence in the void, a living embodiment of the prices that have to be paid for civilization to persist. The crew doesn't want to see the face of that price. They don't want to acknowledge what has to be sacrificed so that they can survive. So they avoid the navigator chamber. They pretend the navigator doesn't exist, except for those moments when the ship needs to enter the warp and navigation becomes necessary. Some crew members deliberately take routes that avoid the chamber entirely, as if proximity to a navigator might contaminate them somehow. Contact with the crew happens exclusively through intermediaries, usually the ship's astropath, a different kind of psyker trained in entirely different disciplines. The astropath might receive astropathic messages from across the galaxy through psychic means, while the navigator perceives the warp directly. The interaction between them is tense when it happens at all. The astropath is also mutated and isolated, but they're treated better because they fit more easily into the social hierarchy of a ship. A navigator, though, is something that doesn't fit anywhere. Too important to ignore, too disturbing to acknowledge. Food arrives through a sealed slot, usually adequate but cold by the time it reaches the chamber. Some navigators report that they can taste the fear of whoever prepared the meal, that the emotion somehow imprints itself onto the food in a way that makes consumption psychologically difficult. Water comes in sealed containers replaced regularly. Waste disposal happens through sealed chutes. There is no privacy even in basic bodily functions. The waste is monitored for signs of warp, corruption, or psychological breakdown. The light in the navigator's chamber never dims. It remains at full brightness constantly, never varying, never allowing for the cycle of darkness that human biology seems to need. Some navigators might request a dimming after decades of service, perhaps down to 80% of full brightness, but this requires years of perfect service record and extensive psychological evaluation. The constant illumination serves a practical purpose. It keeps the navigator anchored to real space, prevents their mind from slipping too deeply into warp visions. But it also makes sleep nearly impossible. Most navigators survive on a few hours per cycle, their minds too agitated by artificial light to drift off properly. Over time, this sleep deprivation compounds with the psychological strain, creating a cumulative exhaustion that never fully heals. Some navigators develop the ability to sleep with their eyes open, their minds managing to rest even as their third eye remains vigilant. Communication with the rest of the ship comes through a Vox grill built into the wall. Orders arrive through this speaker. Status reports about the ship are transmitted through, and when the vessel must enter the warp, someone on the bridge will make contact and request navigation. What happens next is the most important and most terrifying moment in a navigator's life. The Vox grill crackles to life, and a voice, usually the ship's captain or the rogue trader who owns the vessel, explains the situation, the void ahead, the distance to be covered, the time constraints, and then the question that comes every time: navigator, what route can you offer us? When called to navigate, a navigator must deepen their connection to the warp far beyond the small fraction they maintain constantly. They must enter a meditative state aided by specific drugs, hallucinogens and stimulants mixed in recipes known only to individual navigator houses. Formulas passed down through generations, secrets worth more than planetary tithes. The drugs are administered through injection, usually by the navigator themselves or sometimes by a specialized servitor assigned to the chamber. The servitors are constructed specifically for this purpose, their minds wiped clean and replaced with basic programming designed only for this single task. They don't fear navigators. They don't judge. They simply enter when called, inject the mixture, and leave. The effect isn't immediate. There's a period of 10 to 15 minutes where consciousness shifts, the walls of the chamber becoming less real, the protective equations and sigils seeming to glow with inner light. Your heartbeat quickens. Your breathing becomes shallow. Sweat beads on your forehead. You're standing at the edge of an abyss, about to deliberately jump into it because that's your job. Then suddenly the barrier between real space and the warp becomes permeable. The navigator's consciousness rushes outward, expanding beyond the boundaries of flesh encompassing the ship, the void around it, and the impossible geometries of the warp itself. Time seems to stop, or maybe it accelerates. The concepts don't apply anymore. What a navigator perceives during this state defies description because it's not actually vision in any meaningful sense. Vision implies a single point of view, a single perspective, but warp sight is something far more complex and far more disturbing. A navigator in this state experiences something closer to omniscience. They perceive the ship from multiple angles simultaneously, seeing it from outside the hull even as they see it from within. They perceive multiple possible paths through the warp branching before them like an infinite tree. Each path leads to a different destination. Each path carries different probabilities of success. Each path presents different dangers. Some paths glow with a gentle, welcoming light. Others wreathe with threatening shadows. Some paths seem to whisper promises. Others scream warnings that can't quite be understood. Some paths are lit by a strange and terrible light that navigators learn to recognize as the beacon of the Astronomicon, the massive psychic amplifier maintained on holy terror to light the way for Imperial ships crossing the void. Finding the Astronomicon is always the first priority, the guiding star that leads home to Imperial space. But the Astronomicon is not reliable. It flickers and wavers. Sometimes it grows faint or disappears entirely for terrifying periods. There are entire regions of the Imperium where the Astronomicon cannot be perceived at all. Territories lost to the Imperium, worlds cut off from the light, doomed to navigate blind or condemned to become isolated and forgotten by civilization. These regions terrify navigators more than anything else in the warp. Without the light of terror to guide them, they're essentially flying blind through a dimension that wants them dead. But the paths through the warp are not empty. As a navigator expands their consciousness into that nightmare dimension, they become aware of other presences. Some are relatively harmless, remnants of dead civilizations, echoes of extinct species, psychic imprints of terrible events that left scars on the fabric of reality itself. Billions of years of history, all of it compressed into the warp, all of it potentially perceivable if you know how to look. Other presences are far more dangerous. There are entities in the warp that are actively hostile to human consciousness, creatures that have evolved or been created in that dimension specifically to prey on minds that enter their domain. The Imperium calls these daemons, though the actual nature and origin of these entities remains one of the most hotly debated topics among psychers and priests. The daemons come in infinite varieties, each one a manifestation of a different aspect of chaos and corruption. There are daemons of obsession and desire, creatures that feed on human lusts and wants. There are daemons of rage and violence, beings composed entirely of concentrated malice. There are daemons of despair and hopelessness, entities embodying the crushing weight of loss and failure. And there are things so alien and incomprehensible that human minds struggle to acknowledge they exist, much less describe them. These beings are drawn to a navigator in the warp like moths to flame. They recognize in the navigator a consciousness that is spread thin and vulnerable, a mind that has intentionally weakened its defenses to perform navigation work. The barriers between you and them grow thin when you enter this state. Some navigators report that they can feel the daemons circling them, like sharks detecting blood in the water. A daemon attack is never physical in the traditional sense. There is no sword or claw. Instead, the attack is entirely psychic, entirely a matter of will and consciousness and spiritual power. The daemon presses against the navigator's mind, attempting to force its way into their thoughts, to corrupt them, to bend them toward destructive purposes. Some daemons attempt to bargain, offering knowledge or power in exchange for small corruptions of the navigation path. Tiny deviations that might cause the ship to arrive at an unexpected location or arrive with unexpected cargo from the warp riding in the hold. These bargains always seem reasonable at first. The daemon explains that it just needs a small deviation, just a minor course correction, nothing that would actually harm the crew. But navigators know better. They know that accepting even the smallest corruption is accepting a foot in the door, an opening that the daemon can use to widen its grip on your mind. Other daemons simply attempt to shatter the navigator's will with waves of psychic assault, trying to overwhelm human consciousness until the mind fragments and the navigator loses their grip on navigation entirely. The force of these attacks is staggering. It's like being hit by waves of absolute negation, attacks designed specifically to undermine human sanity. Some navigators describe it as hearing every evil thing they've ever done or said being broadcast directly into their consciousness simultaneously. Others describe it as being forced to witness every possible death they could experience, every horrible outcome that could befall them. Some describe it as being unmade at the fundamental level of consciousness, as if their entire existence is being rejected by reality itself. The primary defense a navigator has against these attacks is training and will. From childhood, navigators learn mental discipline techniques designed to protect consciousness against warp intrusion. They learn to visualize protective barriers, to construct mental fortifications that can withstand assault. They learn to recognize daemon attack patterns and counter them with trained responses. Some navigators develop the ability to fight back psychically, to project their own will into the warp as a weapon, to hurt or repel attacking creatures. But this is always a last resort, because actively attacking a daemon in the warp brings your consciousness dangerously close to the entity's own being, increases the risk of corruption and contamination. A navigator who fights back too aggressively might accidentally let a daemon into their mind, or worse, might invite something even more powerful to notice them. Many navigators carry psychic scars from these encounters. They experience recurring nightmares of attacks happening over and over, their sleeping minds unable to release the trauma. Others develop a form of psychic post-traumatic stress, their consciousness permanently altered by repeated exposure to warp entities. A few develop hypervigilance where they never fully relax, never fully lower their psychic defenses, even during normal life. Their minds remain in constant alert, waiting for the next attack that could come at any moment. Some navigators report that they can feel the presence of daemons, even when they're not actively in the warp, that the things they've encountered have left marks on their consciousness that won't fade. They check their thoughts constantly, looking for subtle corruption, trying to determine if each idea they have is actually theirs or if something inhuman has managed to plant it in their mind. The worst cases involve direct corruption. If a daemon penetrates a navigator's psychic defenses deeply enough, it can imprint itself on their consciousness, leaving marks that don't fade. Some navigators develop new thoughts that feel alien, ideas that arose unbidden from somewhere deep inside their own minds but that feel fundamentally wrong. These might be violent impulses directed at crew members, or suicidal ideation, or an overwhelming urge to alter the navigation course toward unknown and dangerous destinations. The Imperium has protocols for daemon-corrupted navigators, though these protocols are classified and sealed in restricted archives. Rumors suggest they involve immediate retirement from service and either confinement under heavy psychic suppression or execution. Some whisper that the Inquisition has entire facilities dedicated to the containment of daemon-corrupted navigators, places so secret that even the highest officials in the Imperium don't know where they are. Navigation itself is not simply a matter of pointing the ship in the right direction. The paths through the warp are infinite and infinitely complex. Some paths are relatively safe, well-traveled routes used for centuries or millennia. These paths appear on ancient navigation charts maintained by the Imperium, records of successful journeys that provide some assurance the path can be traveled again. These routes are jealously guarded secrets. A navigator house that discovers a new safe route can leverage that knowledge for enormous political and economic advantage. But these safe routes have a terrible cost time. A safe route takes weeks or months to traverse, during which the ship remains in the warp, exposed to every danger and horror that dimension contains. Every day in the warp is a day when something can go wrong. Every day is a risk. Crew morale suffers. Supplies run low. People start showing signs of warp-induced psychosis. Some crew members go mad from the simple fact of being in the warp too long. There are faster routes, paths that cut through the warp in ways that barely qualify as routes at all. A particularly talented navigator might identify a shortcut, a way through the nightmare that could reduce a 3-month journey to 3 weeks. The temptation to take these shortcuts is enormous. Imagine being offered the chance to cut a journey in half, to get your crew out of the warp faster, to reduce their exposure to danger and horror. But these shortcuts carry enormous risk. Faster paths are usually unmapped, uncharted territory where no navigator has successfully traveled before. The probability calculations become exponentially more complex. The chance of the ship being torn apart by warp storms or crashing into something that shouldn't exist increases dramatically. The attention of the warp itself seems to intensify along these uncharted paths, as if the warp resents having its territory cut through in new ways. Every time a navigator plots a route, they gamble with the lives of everyone aboard. They make calculations based on incomplete information, using instinct and training and whatever psychic sensitivity they can bring to bear, and then they commit the entire vessel to a course that might end in triumph or catastrophe. Some navigators become paralyzed by this responsibility, spending hours agonizing over which route to take, calling for delays while they check and recheck calculations. They can see all the potential outcomes spreading before them, can see the branches where their choice leads to disaster, can see the timelines where their decision results in catastrophic loss of life. It's almost too much for a human mind to bear, this ability to perceive the consequences of choices before making them. Others become reckless, adopting faster and faster routes, pushing the boundaries of what's possible to prove their own skill and worth. If a navigator chooses a safe route, and the journey takes 3 months when it could have taken 3 weeks, the crew suffers, supplies run low, the ship becomes a flying coffin for months. People die from boredom and depression, and the simple wearing down of human psychology that comes with prolonged confinement. But if a navigator chooses a fast route and something goes wrong, the entire ship can be lost. Thousands or tens of thousands of lives can be extinguished in moments. The navigator must carry that weight, must live with knowing their judgment resulted in catastrophic loss of life. Some navigators are never the same after such an event. They carry the knowledge of those deaths inside their minds forever, knowing that they made the choice that led to those deaths. Some eventually break entirely under the weight of that responsibility. Over time, this constant burden of choice wears down even the most resilient navigator. Some develop fatalism, a sense that outcomes are predetermined and their choices ultimately irrelevant. This attitude can be dangerous, leading to careless navigation and preventable disasters. Others develop obsessive, compulsive behaviors, trapped in endless loops of checking and rechecking, unable to commit to a decision because no option feels sufficiently safe. Some develop complete decision paralysis, becoming so terrified of wrong choices that they eventually cannot make any choice at all, requiring forced medication or psychic conditioning to continue functioning. There are documented cases of navigators who became so frozen by indecision that their ships drifted in the warp for months, unable to navigate because the navigator couldn't commit to a route. There is also the matter of forbidden knowledge. A navigator who has spent significant time in the warp inevitably learns things about the nature of reality that are dangerous, knowledge the Imperium has gone to great lengths to suppress or control. They might catch glimpses of alternate timelines, of histories that diverged from our own at critical junctures. They might perceive the existence of entities and civilizations that official doctrine insists do not exist. They might become aware of prophecies written into the fabric of the warp itself, divine messages or terrible predictions deemed too dangerous to acknowledge. Some navigators catch glimpses of the far future, see visions of possibilities that the Imperium works desperately to prevent. These visions haunt them for the rest of their lives. The Imperium has offices dedicated to managing this problem. The Inquisition, the most secretive and most feared branch of imperial authority. Inquisitors regularly interview navigators, specifically seeking to root out dangerous knowledge acquired during service. There are protocols for memory removal, psychic techniques that can erase specific information from a navigator's mind. These procedures are imperfect and carry the risk of significant psychological damage or erasing more than intended, but the Inquisition deems it necessary. A navigator who knows too much is a liability. A navigator who might speak of things seen in the warp is a threat to the stability of imperial doctrine, and therefore a threat to the Imperium itself. The Inquisition views dangerous knowledge the way a gardener views weeds, something that must be rooted out completely to prevent it from spreading. As navigators age, the constant warp exposure takes an increasingly visible toll. The mutations progress. Additional eyes might form in unexpected places. Some navigators report that their bones become brittle, requiring specialized diets rich in rare minerals just to maintain skeletal integrity. Others experience progressive sensory degradation, becoming less able to perceive the warp even as they rely more heavily on that perception. It's like slowly going blind in the one sense that matters most for your survival. The cognitive decline is often the most distressing aspect. Many navigators find themselves becoming forgetful, their thoughts moving in circles, their ability to focus and concentrate diminishing year by year. Some report that they can feel their memories degrading, that important moments from their lives are slowly being erased or corrupted into versions that don't quite match what they remember happening. By the time a navigator reaches their 60s or 70s, many are no longer capable of reliable service. The mutations have become too severe, the mind too fragmented, the warp connection too unstable. Their perception of the warp becomes unreliable. They might perceive phantom routes that don't actually exist, or miss actual paths because their minds aren't processing the information correctly anymore. Some navigator houses maintain retirement communities where aged and infirm navigators can live in relative comfort and seclusion. These are exceptions. More commonly, aged navigators are quietly retired from active service and relegated to administrative or teaching positions. Some are kept as living archives, their knowledge and experience preserved by scribes and psychers, every memory deemed important documented before it fades. The irony is that the knowledge they're trying to preserve is often corrupted and unreliable by this point, their minds damaged by decades of warp exposure. Some of these aged navigators are even granted the honor of training new navigators, passing on their knowledge to the next generation. But these training sessions are often painful and ineffective. The aged navigator struggles to articulate the things they understand on such a deep level. The young navigators listen politely but can't truly comprehend the information until they undergo their own awakening. And some of the knowledge being transmitted is corrupted by warp exposure, wrong in subtle ways that the aged navigator doesn't realize. Young navigators sometimes learn techniques that are dangerous, that put them at greater risk during their first navigation attempts. The worst cases are navigators who begin showing signs of severe warp corruption in their later years. As the mind degrades and psychic defenses weaken, the barriers protecting a navigator's consciousness from warp intrusion can begin to crumble. Some navigators report developing new thoughts that feel alien, ideas that seem to come from somewhere else entirely. These might be violent impulses, suicidal ideation, or the overwhelming urge to alter navigation toward unknown destinations. Some develop the belief that they are not human at all, but something else, something that should be in the warp permanently rather than being trapped in flesh. Some claim that the daemons they've encountered are actually trying to rescue them, trying to liberate them from their human imprisonment. The Imperium has protocols for these cases, though what those protocols actually involve is classified and sealed in restricted archives. Rumors suggest they involve immediate retirement and either confinement under heavy psychic suppression or execution. More commonly, aged and corrupted navigators simply descend into madness. Their consciousness fractures entirely, their ability to distinguish between warp and real space completely breaking down. In these final stages, the navigator is usually sedated heavily and kept in secure confinement, their chamber sealed and guarded to prevent self-harm or harm to others. Some become violent, their corrupted minds interpreting confinement as imprisonment by enemies. They attack the walls of their chambers with superhuman strength, driven by delusions that they need to escape, that their captors are daemons trying to keep them trapped. Others become catatonic, their consciousness apparently retreating entirely, leaving the body as an empty shell. A few seem to achieve a kind of peace, their sedated minds apparently content in whatever interior landscape they now inhabit, smiling at visions only they can see. The families of navigators often struggle with knowledge of what their relatives have become. Initial pride in having a family member elevated to navigator status typically gives way to shame or denial. Many families refuse to speak of their navigator relatives, pretend they don't exist, treat their mutation as family disgrace rather than honor. It's easier that way. It's easier to let the navigator fade from memory than to confront the reality of what they've become. Some families maintain correspondence, regularly sending letters and messages, but these communications are heavily censored and monitored by Imperium officials, and the emotional distance grows greater with each passing year. By the time a navigator reaches middle age, most have received their last message from family. By old age, most have been effectively abandoned, cast off as reminders of a life the family wishes to forget. The worst part is that most navigators understand this. They know why their families stop writing. They know the burden their existence places on their family name. Despite the isolation and horror, navigators are not entirely without companionship. In larger ports or aboard particularly large vessels, multiple navigators might be stationed. Their interactions are carefully controlled and monitored. Two navigators' consciousnesses mixing in the warp can create dangerous interference patterns and unpredictable effects, but they do occasionally interact. These interactions range from formal professional exchanges to something resembling genuine friendship, bonds forged in the crucible of mutual horror and understanding. When two navigators finally speak to each other, even through sealed chambers and communication grills, there is an immediate understanding. They don't need to explain what it's like. They already know. Some navigators develop romantic relationships with each other, rare instances of genuine intimacy within isolated existence. These relationships are officially discouraged by the Imperium, which sees reproduction between navigators as uncontrolled mutation that could lead to unpredictable consequences. But the policy is inconsistently enforced, and in some cases romantic partnerships are tacitly permitted. In rare cases where two navigators are granted permission to reproduce, their children show remarkable warp sensitivity even by navigator standards, suggesting that genetic expression of navigator abilities can be intensified through selective breeding. Some navigator houses deliberately arrange these pairings, creating super navigators with abilities that surpass their parents. The ethical implications of this deliberate breeding program are something the Imperium does not discuss. More common are bonds of shared experience, of understanding that only someone who has lived through the same horror can truly achieve. A newly awakened navigator will often seek out experienced navigators, desperate for guidance on coping with overwhelming sensory input and the realization of permanent isolation. The experienced navigator, remembering their own awakening, offers whatever comfort and practical advice they can. These mentorships last for decades, the younger navigator gradually gaining confidence and skill, learning to navigate the warp more reliably and withstand the psychological pressures of their role. The experienced navigator finds a kind of purpose in this teaching, a meaning that their own isolated existence might otherwise lack. There is also a kind of gallows humor that develops within navigator communities, dark comedy emerging when people confront absurdity and horror daily. Navigators joke about their mutations, making light of things that terrify them most. They share stories of bizarre warp visions or incomprehensible entity encounters. They laugh about crew superstitions or the absurdity of protective runes supposedly keeping them safe. This humor is a coping mechanism, a way of maintaining sanity when surrounded by forces actively working against sanity. When navigators gather in the restricted sections of major ports, there are times when the sound of their laughter echoes through the halls, strange, slightly unhinged laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Underneath all the horror and isolation and slowly encroaching madness, most navigators maintain the fundamental belief that their suffering serves a purpose, that the price they pay is necessary for human civilization's survival. Without navigators, the Imperium cannot maintain the interstellar trade routes holding civilization together. Without navigators, individual worlds become isolated, cut off from resources and support only interstellar commerce can provide. Within a generation, isolated worlds fall into barbarism. Within 2 or 3 generations, they become wild planets with populations reverting to primitive society. Within centuries, those worlds become legends, forgotten places spoken of in terrified whispers by those who remember they once existed. The Imperium is held together by threads of commerce and communication that span light years of void, and those threads are maintained by navigators. The Imperium covers millions of worlds spread across the galaxy. The distances involved make conventional physics inadequate for travel or communication. The only way to move between stars quickly enough for civilization to maintain continuity is through the warp, and the only way to safely traverse the warp is through navigators. No navigator, no matter how isolated or tormented, escapes the knowledge that they are essential. They are not replaceable. Without them, everything falls apart. This knowledge is perhaps the cruelest aspect of their existence, because it means that no matter how broken they become, no matter how much their minds suffer, they cannot step away from their duty. To abandon their role is to condemn billions to suffering and death. Some navigators find meaning in this. They accept their isolation and their mutations and their slow mental decay as the necessary cost of maintaining human civilization. They convince themselves that their suffering is noble, that they are martyrs to the cause of humanity's persistence. These navigators often perform the best, the most reliable, their commitment to duty almost fanatical in its intensity. They execute navigation with precision and reliability, consistently choosing the safest routes even when faster paths are possible, even when their own desires might pull them toward reckless action. These navigators tend to live longer, their minds remaining more stable, their warp mutations progressing more slowly. Whether this longevity is because of their mental state or despite it remains unclear. Some believe that acceptance of one's fate actually stabilizes the mind against warp corruption. Others believe that those navigators are simply more careful, more willing to take extra precautions. Other navigators become bitter, resentful of the life imposed on them, angry at a universe and an imperium that would create such things and then demand grateful service. These navigators perform their duties reliably enough. They have no real choice, but they do so with a kind of passive resistance, a subtle refusal to cooperate beyond the bare minimum required. Some of them take risks, choosing faster routes when possible, exploring uncharted paths through the warp just to see what might be there, sometimes endangering their crews through calculated recklessness. Some of these angry navigators eventually crack entirely, deliberately sabotaging navigation or attempting to harm themselves or others. When this happens, they are usually removed from service and placed in confinement or executed. The Imperium does not tolerate dangerous navigators. Those who cannot be controlled are eliminated. A few navigators, rare individuals who seem to possess something approaching genuine mental fortitude, manage to find a kind of balance. They accept their isolation without becoming broken by it. They perform their duties reliably without becoming obsessive about them. They maintain their humanity despite the mutations threatening to destroy it. These navigators are treasured by their houses, protected and preserved, their psychic stability monitored carefully by specialists. When they eventually reach the point where their minds begin to fail, their houses make special efforts to ensure they are cared for with dignity. Some are even granted the choice to end their own suffering rather than face slow decline into madness. These navigators are the rarest type of all, the ones who manage to navigate not just the warp, but the maze of their own consciousness as well. The daily existence of a navigator is not entirely bleak, though it comes close. There are small moments of relief and even occasional happiness. A navigator might develop a deep interest in history or philosophy, and spend long hours studying ancient texts, finding meaning in the accumulated wisdom of past ages. Some navigators develop artistic talents, creating sculptures or paintings or music from within the confines of their chambers, expressing through art the things they cannot express through words. Some maintain correspondence with specific crew members who manage to overcome their fear and superstition, forming genuine friendships despite the barriers the Imperium places between them. A few navigators even develop religious faith, finding comfort in the belief that their suffering is observed and appreciated by the God Emperor himself, that their sacrifice contributes to the broader glory of the Imperium. Whether this faith is genuine spiritual connection or merely a coping mechanism is something each navigator must decide for themselves. But these moments of relief are always temporary, always shadows cast by larger darkness. The warp is always present at the edge of consciousness. The split nature of awareness never heals. The mutations never reverse. The isolation never ends. A navigator knows that their life trajectory is predictable. Decades of service punctuated by increasingly severe psychological episodes, eventual degradation into madness or uselessness beyond work, and finally death alone in confinement, or if they are very lucky, in the comfortable retirement facilities maintained by wealthy navigator houses. Some of the most powerful navigator houses, those with ancient bloodlines and enormous wealth, maintain actual palaces where aged navigators can spend their final years. But these are exceptions. Most navigators will never experience such luxury. Yet somehow navigators persist. They accept their role and they perform it. Starships continue to cross the void guided by navigator consciousness. Worlds remain connected by the thread of commerce and communication that only navigators can maintain. Civilization persists in the darkness between stars, sustained by the sacrifice of mutated humans trapped between realities, their minds stretched across impossible distances, their sanity slowly eroding with each journey through the warp. The Imperium does not acknowledge the horror of this arrangement. It does not celebrate the navigators who make it possible. It simply accepts their service as a cost of doing business, treats them as living tools rather than people, consigns them to chambers and isolation and slowly encroaching madness. A navigator might serve for 50 years of isolation, 50 years of warp visions, 50 years of psychological degradation, 50 years of watching their own body change into something inhuman, 50 years of carrying the weight of the lives depending on their choices, 50 years of never once stepping outside their chamber to feel genuine sunlight or breathe unfiltered air. And when those 50 years are over, there is no retirement ceremony, no recognition, no thanks from the Imperium that has used them so completely. There is only the quiet end, and the assumption that another navigator will step into the role they vacated. The most tragic aspect of navigator existence is that most of them are never even acknowledged by history. The great voyages that shape imperial politics, the expeditions that open new territories for colonization, the pilgrimages to Holy Terra, all of these depend entirely on navigator skill and sacrifice, and yet the navigators themselves remain invisible. History records the names of the captains, and the rogue traders and the military commanders. The navigators are footnotes, if they are mentioned at all. Some of the greatest navigators who ever lived are completely unknown outside of the restricted archives of their houses. Their names, their achievements, their sacrifices, all lost to time and deliberate suppression by the Imperium. This is the life of a navigator in Warhammer 40K, not heroic, not glorified, not even particularly appreciated, just necessary, just the price that has to be paid for humanity to persist among the stars. And navigators pay it day after day, century after century. Their consciousnesses stretched thin between worlds, their bodies slowly transforming into something inhuman, their minds gradually fracturing under pressure that no human psychology was ever designed to withstand. They are humanity's greatest asset and its deepest shame, essential and invisible, revered in theory and ignored in practice. They are the living bridges between realities, and the bridge always suffers the most weight. They are the threads that hold civilization together, and they unravel slowly, painfully, over decades of isolated service. When you think about the Imperium of Man, think about the navigators. Think about what they've sacrificed. Think about the price they've paid so that you can live in a stable, connected civilization. Think about the navigators locked in their chambers right now, their consciousness stretched across the warp, guiding ships through nightmare dimensions so that cargo can be delivered and messages can be sent. Think about the aged navigators in their retirement facilities, their minds broken and their bodies failing, their entire existence reduced to a series of painful moments. Think about the young navigators awakening to their powers, terrified and confused, beginning their journey into eternal isolation. The Imperium's existence is built on the suffering of these people, and they endure that suffering because, fundamentally, they understand what the alternative would be. If you want to explore more about the grim darkness of the 41st millennium and understand the horrifying realities that most imperial citizens never see, the price paid in blood and sanity for human civilization's survival, subscribe to our channel. We dive deep into Warhammer 40K lore and bring you stories of the forgotten heroes, the invisible sacrifices, the costs of maintaining the Imperium that official history never acknowledges. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss another deep dive into the most brutal science fiction universe ever created. And if you want to support this channel and help us create more content about the dark corners of the 41st millennium, consider becoming a channel member. Your support means everything to us. Thank you for watching, and remember, in the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war, and behind every war, guiding every ship, suffering every moment, there are the navigators.